Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor. I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about gender. It's one of these things that has been in the news a lot, is in the public eye an awful lot, has been adopted by politics on a grand scale in various ways, and is one of these topics that gets an awful lot of kind of time in debates and things like that in various different places, but which I don't feel really needs it. It's a very simple situation, but there are individuals who either want to ignore or distort truth and the evidence surrounding this issue purely to give themselves more power, give themselves more leverage to one degree or another, or to make themselves feel better, to stand out, or whatever else. Which, again, I also don't understand, but I'll get to that in a minute. But to begin with, I want to just start off because a lot of this comes down to the word, and the word gender is one with a very kind of interesting past to it. And as I've said, words specifically don't have power, but the way that people have chosen to react to this particular word and what it entails has been substantial, and in some cases particularly harmful, both to the people that just take on the ideas of people that want to change the meaning or ignore it or try and remove it to one extent or another, or from the people who feel out of place due to these ideas being thrown at them and them not fitting into them. But let's start off at the very beginning. Originally, the term gender was coined by scientists to be, to one extent or another, interchangeable with the word sex, as in biological sex. And arguably before that, it was purely for grammatical purposes, as was the case when a lexicographer who called Henry Watson Fowler left a comment that I found when I was double checking a couple of things for this video. Lexicographer, by the way, someone that either compiles dictionaries or analyzes the way that words are used. But he came out and said that, to paraphrase, gender as a word is, if someone uses it in regards to sex, then they are either using it in a colloquial sense or they are misspeaking, as the word gender purely relates to language, i.e., having a male word, feminine word, neuter word, and so that was in, I believe, 1926, and as a result, that's where this kind of starts. It was very much just a word that was firstly frowned upon when it was used interchangeably. Then it became more common to use it interchangeably just with biological sex, and then excuse me, and then you get into the 1950s, and um, there was a social scientist, I believe, of some description. I believe his name was John Money, and he started to use the word to suggest the state of a person living as male or female, i.e., the sets of traits and behaviours and kind of expected patterns that you can see in an individual of male or female, the perceptions that those individuals have, and the way in which they experience the world in a broad manner was all lined up under masculinity and femininity, and dropped under this banner of gender. And so it was the state of being male or the state of being female. Now that's not really an issue. That's suggesting that the psychology of an individual, informed by a mix of a substantial amount of their biology, but a small amount of their environment that they traverse through, has an effect on their perceptions, their behaviours, their traits, and so on. Which, nature and nurture both play into things. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to start assuming. But then you move on to the 1970s, and now this is where the whole thing starts to get a little muddy, because that's where the feminist movement of the time, which was the birthplace of the roots for the current rather aggressive and somewhat misguided level of modern feminism we see on a day-to-day basis, when you have an awful lot of talk of intersectionality and things like that, which again still don't quite add up. But you move on to the 1970s, and they take this word and they take this view of the state, and they try and suggest that it's some kind of scale, and it gets continually worked on and discussed and expanded, and so that it's so that gender becomes less and less of a thing. It's more of just this ephemeral idea. It's this social construct, which is unfortunate because it's not true. That there's if it were true, then you would expect different tribes around the world that are incredibly isolated and so on and so forth to have incredibly dissimilar gender roles, incredibly dissimilar practices based on numbers or based on their environment to one extent or another, because their society is going to be substantially different, especially when they've been isolated for so long. And the problem here is that you don't see that. The gender roles always line up along with the role of the sex for the most part. And as a result, the distinction just doesn't seem to exist. The state of being male or female in these places seems to very much line up with their biological condition of being male or female, and as a result, it doesn't seem to add up. However, moving on from that though, into the modern day, you now have this large discussion about gender, and a lot of it seems to be kind of doublethink-esque, because you've got these individuals suggesting that gender doesn't exist, it's a social construct, the labels should be removed, and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter. Now here's the problem with that. If it doesn't matter to that extent, then that means that it doesn't exist. That's fine. We can ignore everything that is said about it then. And as a result, the only information that you have to travel on, the only information that you have to properly, securely address is the biology, the actual concrete, unchangeable state in which you are born. And as a result of that, you could say, well, okay, well, ignoring gender, then the going to the biological sex and so on and so forth, that's all we've got. So your argument still falls down, because people who are born in as one sex or another have brain structures that allow them to act or perceive or do whatever in different ways. That's just there is a substantial difference between male and female. Now there is a very small number of people on the planet that don't quite conform to the norm in that regard, whereby you have transgender individuals who, to one extent or another, seem to have, from at least a smattering of things that I've come across, there is reason to believe that these individuals have brains that conform more to the structures of the opposite sex, and as a result, then you have the whole disassociation between mind and body, because your mind is wanting to find one thing and the body is not adding up to that. And that is, again, a very small percentage of the population at large, and it's a sorry state of affairs, especially in places that don't look to support those individuals or actively wish to suppress them. But at the same time, those individuals existing demonstrates again, though, that this state of being male or female, whether regardless of how perceptive it is, perception based it is, it's still something that's very concrete and encoded into you from a biological level, and it's still purely a 2-point system, where there's a scale on either end, but there is a massive void between the two, and it requires a substantial amount of medical intervention to make some kind, not a perfect jump by any means, but some kind of jump from one to the other. And now, moving on from that, though, you've then got these individuals who are arguing that the gender doesn't exist, shouldn't exist, but also don't want to accept that sex is therefore the only thing that we have to inform. But then they say, well, you should remove the labels. And then they add so many labels, like the fact that the city of New York in the United States has recently recognized, I believe, 36 different genders, which don't actually exist. And this is where the problems start to come in. For example, in this country, you have a lot of people that are slowly getting on board with this idea, and yet, as a result, some of the problems coming down from that is that you've got a child who may very well be in some way, let's say you've got a little boy that's less masculine than his friends, or the other people that he's in school with, or whatever else, and that could just mean that he's an effeminate man. He's on part of the scale of masculinity that makes him more reserved, or possibly not even more reserved, but just more effeminate. And yet then, due to social pressures, and this is where the social pressures actually come in, due to social pressures and due to some of those things, those individuals, those kids are then given puberty delaying drugs, and these are things that shouldn't be happening to children. Let them finish their growth first and then let them decide. You know, you can't start children with off in life at a young age with puberty delaying hormones, or with sex change therapies and surgeries and things like that when they're a child and their parents aren't them. They cannot make the informed decision on their behalf, as whatever they do to that kid, they will then have to live with their entire life. And this is one of the reasons why when I was doing my looking through for the beginning of this video, I found a report by the American College of Pediatricians, which was specifically urging both educators, legislators, other medical experts, and so on, to accept urging them to promote accepting a normal life of some description, to ignore surgery and chemical things, all based on like a child's condition, or whereby they may just be something of a tomboy or somewhat effeminate. The last line in the short introduction to their points actually rings particularly true, and that is facts, but not ideology, determine reality. And this is the problem, because you've got these people who are promoting the arguments around gender, because most people don't care, yeah? Both on either side of the political spectrum, be it the feminists that want to apply umpteen million labels to everything, and who have already once changed the definition of the word gender for their own purposes to one degree or another, or at least expanded it for their own purposes, or be it the people at the other end of the political spectrum who actively want these people to stop existing. Regardless of which end you are, the fight between the two is only making more of a mess, and it's only clouding the issue even further, when the issue is, quite frankly, a very scientific and very easy one, and that is that you can be male and have a male brain but still be effeminate. You can still be uninterested in sport or whatever else, removing some of these supposed traits that you would attach to an individual. Just because you have a majority of those traits to one extent or another does not mean you have all of them. But the thing is, that just leaves a scale on either side, a scale of men and a scale of women, and there are numerous scales that can be generated to try and demonstrate men and women in different ways. I have many that I'm going to put into videos at a later date myself, but it's a case of the ideologies held are what is informing these arguments. The ideology around the fear of transgender people in North Carolina going into toilets of the opposite sex and causing problems. No, that's not a thing. It wasn't supported by any real evidence. It wasn't supported by any crime statistics or anything like that to one greater extent or another. It was somewhat ridiculous, especially considering it was proposed in the United States, where their healthcare is in no way really covered. So the individuals that are going through those procedures to look like a member of the opposite sex from the one that they were born as, they are putting an awful lot of time, hardship, money, effort, emotional turmoil, and who knows what else into changing to have their body fit better with the way that their brain is. And as a result, why would you go through all of that effort just to go and bother someone in a toilet? I mean, everyone needs to go to the toilet. So, and I've said this in a previous video as well, everyone needs to go to the toilet, in which case that's just a place that you're going. Your mind and your body add up to one extent, and so you have to go somewhere. So that's what you do. You're not there to trouble people, you're there to do your business and leave. Toilets are not the nicest of places. You do not really care to hang out in them, or at least I would hope you don't, to one degree or another. But then you've got, so that's the more conservative side, where they're not listening to fact, they're not listening to evidence, they're not taking on board the states that these people are living their lives in, and so their ignorance of the genetics and the internal workings of a person informing what they want to become and how they operate, them ignoring that is causing them to become very insular and lock things down and try and control things more because they're afraid. Because those things are beyond their ken and they cannot understand them. But then you go to the opposite end of the spectrum and you get the very aggressively the very aggressively undecided individuals who go, it's not a thing, but here are 50 labels. That all of those things to do with science are sex, and gender doesn't exist, but this is gender. You need to, that you cannot argue on so many different fronts for so many different things, because it never adds up, and you always end up losing the discussion, losing the argument. And the only way that these individuals have been able to demonstrate what they're doing at the moment is usually to shout louder. And as a result, though, here's the thing. Individuals who may be more effeminate, who may be more, or in the case of women, more masculine, who are then entering these social circles where they have to be, where they are somewhat pressured to be not actually what they are, but to conform to, I can be whatever I want. I can be a completely gender fluid individual. That can cause more conflict in individuals. And one of the arguments that I've heard, or some of the arguments that I've heard in response to this are, well, when I feel like this, I'll dress like this and I'll act in this way, or when I feel like that, I'll dress like this and I'll act in that way. And that's, to me, that's not anything to do with your gender. That's to do with your perception. That's to do with your psychology. That's to do with you fetishizing and I mean that in the terms of like applying significance to an object or a thing or an activity. Not whips and chains. That would be something different in this particular instance. But the fetishizing of that leads on to a kind of, take an example from my life. When I went to work, when I go to work, for a company or something like that, and I'm wearing a suit. That is, to me, a badge of me belonging there. It's a suit of armor. It's something to solidify me going and doing a thing. And it's all associations and it's all that, but it's got nothing to do if I'm male or female, and it's just me attributing a set of behaviours that I, in my particular case, are particularly aware of, but it's me accepting that my brain has made that association, and in this particular instance it's a positive association, so I'm going with it. And so moving on from that, you have that argument just doesn't hold water, and you have these people tearing themselves apart because they feel like this environment that they're in wants them to be a thing, and if they're not a thing, then it breaks down, and this is more of an issue for younger people now than any other age range, but unfortunately younger people are often somewhat disenfranchised or removed from those older than them, and as a result it's harder for them to get the help because they are only surrounded with their social circle, and the social circle may very well be composed mostly of these misguided individuals. And as a result, you need to, the one thing that I will say to everybody is that you need to accept fact. As I said, one of the things about being a strong person, one of the things about being able to set goals and achieve them, is realism. And if you can't accept the reality of the fact that we are a sexually dimorphic species, everything sits between point A and point B, whereby, in the biology of it, and everything within those 2 points can be a spectrum, but there is a void between that requires medical science to bridge it. You cannot just swap between the two, because gender, albeit a state of perception or a state of being, that is going to that is almost solely informed by your biology and by our species biology. It picks up in regards to the number of things that we see in the animal world. We are animals. There's no two ways about it. Regardless of how many different labels you want to give us and how many different things you want to say we can do, we're animals, and you do not have the kind of gender fluidity that you were talking about in any other creature that is similar to us. Certain fish, microorganisms, invertebrates, to a degree you have that kind of situation, but you do not have mammals that can randomly change their biology to literally shift, and as a result their roles do not shift, and so the state of being that they perceive does not shift. The only reason that we're in this situation is that we've got too smart, and we've been thinking too hard about it, and we've refused, in the instances where this argument comes up, we've refused to accept the most simple explanation as the one that is accurate. And considering, as said at the beginning, the meaning of the word was originally just an interchangeable thing for sex. Originally from grammar, then moving into science, and then it was adopted outside of that by the social movement that still fuels half of the arguments and half of the discussions about it today. And considering you have expert pediatricians, you have psychologists, you have individuals like myself who have had to discuss these things with young people who are having a hard time of it, you have this swathe of individuals who can be counted as experts, who are trying to make a point about it's harmful, especially for young people. They need to be at a point where, I mean young people as in anyone from a child to your teens, you need to have an appreciation of the world around you, of yourself, and of what you want, before you even consider things like surgery for becoming transgender. And if you need to just live out your life to be happy as being an effeminate man, that's fine, or a very masculine woman, that's fine. When I was a kid, those used to be kind of tomboys, and it used to be just kind of camp guys. There's no two ways about that. If that's the way that you're happy living out your life, live out your life that way, and I'm sure that no one will give a shit. The reason why people are paying attention now is because people are making more noise about it, and the reason why people are making more noise about it is purely to suit their own ideologies, which is why statements like the one from the American College of Pediatricians are having to be put out to try and warn people away from this ideology, literally in some instances poisoning their children and poisoning their continuing lives after the fact. But anyway, that's something that I wanted to touch on, because obviously it's something that touches all of us. We all ascribe to a gender. We have to. The thing is, when someone comes up to me and suggests that they are otherkin or dragonkin or some other ridiculous supposed gender that obviously doesn't exist, because let's face it, dragons don't exist, and if they did, this is the Silver Mountain. We kill dragons here. But what it comes down to is, those don't exist. They're not real. You cannot ascribe to those. Please grow up. Because at the moment you are living in a world of imagination, and there are literally a set of very specific things that demonstrate where gender comes from, what it is, how it's attached to your biology and your sex, and how then, if there are issues along the way, there are experts out there to help you. As you cannot suggest that you have a complete lack of gender and that it doesn't exist and it isn't a real thing, it's just a construct, when you have people who live in states that are not the state that their brain adds up to, and they cannot just randomly go, oh, well, I'm going to be this today. They need to go through surgery and hormone therapy to get them from the place that they start to the place that they want to be. They literally fly in the face of everything that is being argued for from that side. Now, the sun seems to be going down. I realise I've done this video maybe a little bit late, and so I'm just going to close on. I want to know what you guys think. Are you an individual that's been through this? Are you an individual that is not? How much hate can you throw at me? Or do you appreciate what I'm saying? Because quite frankly, I'm supported by some of the top experts, not only in America, but in across the world in this medical area. Because when it boils right down to it, this isn't a social issue or anything like that, because it affects people medically, it affects people psychologically, and it's an issue therefore that needs to be addressed and dealt with in that way so that you get the correct solutions. Because quite frankly, science has the answer on this one, whether or not the anti-intellectual individuals at either end of the political spectrum want to admit it. Anyway, as said, tell me what you think in the comments down below. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think, especially if you've got experiences around this. If you found this at all interesting, drop us a like, and otherwise subscribe for more, as I'm sure I will end up talking about this fairly regularly as well, to one extent or another, whether I like it or not. But anyway, take care guys, have a good day.